So Howie Roseman has made a habit of going against the grain, going one way when the rest of the league is going the opposite direction. How could he try to do that this offseason? I've got some ideas for you on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Eagles fans, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So general manager Howie Roseman has been one of the best GMs in the history of the NFL when you look at his last 7 to 8 year run. I call it the Howie Roseman dynasty. 3 Super Bowl appearances despite different quarterbacks, different head coaches, different cores in general. The one, or I should say one of the 2 consistent variables of this golden era of Eagles football is your top 2 guys, your owner in Jeffrey Lurie and your general manager in Howie Roseman. There's a lot of things that's made this new version of Howie, who took back over in 2016, this new version, there's a lot of things that makes him great. But one of his strongest traits is his ability to go against the grain, to create different ideas of how to build a championship contender, to never feel like he's set in his ways and he has things figured out, to change as the league changes. You know, he said it best in the combine last year, that if you're copying other teams, odds are you're already behind, you're already too late on something. He likes to zig when the rest of the league zags, find market inefficiencies, find overcorrections that the entire league has kind of joined in on, like last year, paying Saquon Barkley, targeting the running back market where there was a clear overcorrection where no teams were paying these players. So you had a generational talent like Saquon Barkley going for $13 million. I mean, he's getting money of I always say Darnell Mooney or a Gabriel Davis, or even like you look at what Nelson Aguilar got back in the day on the open market, a wide receiver 2, a high-end wide receiver 3 contract. That's what Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all of those top-tier talents at this position were going for. Howie Roseman tapped into that market inefficiency, and it helped him win a Super Bowl. Like, he's always tried to do this. Even if it's not just a market overcorrection, he's tried to be creative and just always do things differently. And I think that's one of his strongest traits, like just the creative idea of saying, I'm going to try to completely rebuild one of the historic college defenses and carry it right into the NFL, trying to and pretty much succeeding at rebuilding the 2021-2022 back-to-back national champion Georgia defense. And it's one of the main reasons they won a Super Bowl in 2024. Even going back to 2020, I hated it at the time, but I respect Howie Roseman for always trying to be different. He had just given out a quarterback in Carson Wentz a $100 million contract extension for the long term. What does he do a calendar year later? He drafts a quarterback in the second round. He's always trying to be different. That's something a team would just never do, but he thought about how important it would be to have one of the top-tier backup quarterbacks, how that can help you if Wentz goes down again, like when you had Nick Foles. I mean, you won your first Super Bowl because of that. It could eventually lead to having, trade ammunition in the future. Maybe you try 2 quarterback sets. Like, I hated it at the time, and I still, for that time, thought it was a misuse of a resource. But Howie Roseman, again, that's what he's always trying to do. In a copycat league, Howie Roseman's never the copycat. He is the guy setting the trend. He's not the one following the trend. So I've been thinking about this all offseason because last year, not to toot my own horn, but I did nail the running back thing. I said last February when Howie Roseman had that press conference at the Combine and he was talking about this exact topic, I'm like, what could he do this year to be different? I said this could be the year he goes after the running back market because now he could get a historic talent for a bargain rate. And it actually happened. I'm going to try to create that magic again this year and nail a second straight prediction for this exact topic of how he does different in the 2025 offseason. I've got some ideas that are realistic, some that might be a little more radical, but here are some ideas I came up with for Howie Roseman going against the grain, trying to be different and creative this offseason to continue to build a winner in Philadelphia. One idea that I actually mentioned on Mock Draft Monday earlier this week is the idea of bringing in this safety linebacker Swiss Army knife-like hybrid. Add another do-it-all defensive back for Vic Fangio's defense. And you do have Cooper DeJean, who I think is going to be that player for you long-term. I think he's going to be your Malcolm Jenkins, your Brian Branch in Detroit, your slot corner, your elite player in the box that can wear so many different hats. Against the run, he's going to be one of the best slot corners in the game, covering all different types of receivers. I mean, the dude's basically matchup proof. He can cover any style of receiver. Maybe you start to use him in specific matchups against tight ends, maybe star running backs. So Cooper DeJean can be that Swiss Army knife, but maybe you want a player that's less of a corner safety hybrid. Maybe now you want to add that linebacker safety hybrid. That's a player that I mentioned on the show the other day. I've always wanted that kind of guy. It's why even if they didn't work out, I've always been enamored with like the Isaiah Simmons of the world coming out of Clemson, the Jeremy Chins. Like those are players that I'm always fascinated in, and I always will be. The guys with the long wingspan, the high 40-yard dash, the elite RAS score, the raw athletic score. Like those are the traits kind of players that I'm always enamored with. Maybe Howie Roseman says Nakobe Dean's going to be out for a while. I have Zack Baun linked up long-term on a 3-year extension, but we're going to need that second player in the box to play along Baun. And maybe they re-sign Oren Burks, but do they want Oren Burks or a second-year Jeremiah Trotter Jr. to be a majority of the time player on the defense? Are they players you want on the field the majority of the time, including third downs, obvious passing situations? Maybe a different idea this year, a player that you really haven't had this style of guy on the Eagles defense is that kind of linebacker safety tweener. Maybe it's a Nick Emenwari from North Carolina, or I should say South Carolina, that I have on the graphic here. Maybe you just try to tap into the safety market in general where there's guys not getting a lot of money. Maybe you go with more 3 safety looks, more dime packages next year. Maybe you say, let's continue to draft Georgia players and let's go for Malachi Starks. I don't know if he's going to fall to 32. Maybe it's a small trade up. Maybe he does fall because of the position he plays. Daniel Jeremiah had Malachi Starks as one of his picks to the Eagles in one of his latest mock drafts. So maybe that's an idea for the defense, is saying, hey, what kind of player have we really not had on this defense before? How do we upgrade the number one defense? Well, we don't want to just run it back totally. We want to try to stay ahead of the curve because offenses are going to look at what the Eagles did and say, how do we attack this defense? And there will be changes to this unit in 2025. I like that idea of trying to bring in that tweener, especially considering adding that third guy to the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship group, or even next to Zack Baun, third down packages. This is your dime linebacker. That's a player that I think would be interesting for the Eagles to target. And again, considering safeties right now are just not getting paid, they're not getting drafted high, maybe the Eagles can take advantage of that market. It's, again, not as sexy as going for a Saquon Barkley last year, but if you're thinking more for the defense, that's definitely an idea. Another idea for the defense, I think, would be just to go, Howie Roseman for the first time paid a linebacker top-tier money. Zack Baun now at $17 million a year is the 4th highest paid linebacker in the NFL. So Howie Roseman finally changed his ways and invested a significant resource in the form of a big contract extension to a linebacker. What if he says, I'm going to take this new identity of mine of being a pro linebacker, a linebacker-friendly GM, let's take it to another level. Nakobe Dean's going to be out for a bit. He also is going to need a new contract next year. Am I going to hand out another extension to 2 linebackers? I'll believe it when I see that. Nakobe Dean's a huge part of this locker room. He was great in 2024, one of the most underrated pieces of that Super Bowl season. But what if a guy like Jahad Campbell of Alabama falls down the board? Wingspan, range, coverage ability, the ability to rush the passer, good against the run, good tackler, an every down, do-it-all kind of talent. Reminds me, he is this year's version of Edgerrin Cooper, who I was in love with last year. I thought the best linebacker coming out of the 2024 class, the second-round pick of the Green Bay Packers. What if Howie Roseman said, F it, Jihad Campbell falls down the board. We know how he likes to draft from Alabama and Georgia. It's, again, kind of the same theme as drafting that like safety linebacker hybrid, that just cyborg, wingspan, rangy, fast player on the second level. So it's kind of the same idea, but maybe it's not a Nick Emenwari or a Malachi Starks or a safety you trade for, you sign in free agency that we're not thinking of. Maybe it's the first time Howie Roseman ever drafts a linebacker in the first round. And again, these aren't things I'm predicting. It's just ideas that Howie Roseman normally would not entertain that now he might, because again, he's always trying to go in the opposite direction of the NFL when it's proper. Of course, he knows there's some things the NFL everyone does because it's the way to do it. Invest in quarterback, invest in the trenches, pass rushers, elite pass catchers. Like Howie shouldn't do something just for the sake of being different, but trying to find that like next thing that works in the NFL is that's smart business. And I think these are some ideas for the defense that he normally doesn't do. Like if you added a Jihad Campbell in 2025 to Zack Baun and you have him on a 4-year cost-effective contract because you don't want to give Nakobe Dean an extension, I could totally see that. Or if you want to draft a Malachi Starks or a Nick Emenwari, you sign a Jeremy Chin in free agency. He is an unrestricted free agent from the Washington Commanders. I think those are ideas for the defense for Howie. And again, this doesn't have to be him completely reinventing the wheel, discovering something new in football, tapping into an inefficiency or a market overcorrection. But it could also just be him doing things different than what he normally does, going against the grain compared to his past career. Just being creative. I think those are some ideas on defense. For the offense, I'm going to get a little bit more radical, and I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel. Their live betting feature keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you're missing your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid right away, instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, we're trying to find ways for Howie Roseman to zig when the rest of the NFL zags. And I came up with some ideas on the defensive side of the football. Maybe you target a Swiss Army knife, safety, linebacker, hybrid, versatile piece. Then you have two of these kind of just jack of all trades on the second or third level, Cooper DeJean and whatever style of player you bring in that fits this mold. Maybe Howie Roseman goes even further in to investing in linebacker by drafting a Jihad Campbell out of Alabama with a first-round pick to pair with Zack Baun while Nakobe Dean's out. Maybe this is your long-term replacement because, again, as much as I like Nakobe Dean, is Howie Roseman going to give out 2 contract extensions to linebackers? Maybe. Again, Howie does things different every single year, and that's the whole point of today's episode of this exercise, is to find out what he could be thinking is the new thing to do next, the new way to be different. So those are some ideas for the defense. On offense, I want to start with something that, do I think it's going to happen? No. But I'm trying to put on my tinfoil hat and get a little bit more radical here. Let's say, and this would not make sense with the current structure of the offense. Like if you're going to give a contract extension to Dallas Goedert or just make it work where he's back in 2025, I would not do this because you have A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, Jahan Dotson in year 2, I think is going to be a good player. Love the playoff run that he was on in 2024. it wouldn't make sense here because there's too many mouths to feed as it is. You would not invest the resources it would take to do this with the current team. But there are rumors from multiple Eagles insiders that say maybe Dallas Goedert's going to get traded if they can't get a contract done. 30 years old, has a lengthy injury history. It's a deep tight end class. Maybe if they can't get something done, they trade Dallas Goedert and recoup a draft pick for next year. If they do that, and there's an asterisk on this. If they were to move Dallas Goedert, that is a lot of targets that go out the door. And you still have A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. The passing game is always going to run through those guys, even if Dallas Goedert's on the football field. You still have those two. You have Saquon. You have Jahan Dotson, who would clearly have a much bigger role in the scenario. You could still draft a tight end. There's more calm ways to replace Dallas Goedert than what I'm going to propose. But let's say they do trade Dallas Goedert away, but Howie Roseman wants that third alpha for the offense. What if he traded Dallas Goedert away and then he tried to go after a third star wide receiver? He said, instead of replacing Dallas Goedert in the form of another tight end, what if I went after just a big name receiver to pair with DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown? What if he went after a guy like DK Metcalf, who just requested a trade from the Seattle Seahawks, and try to replicate the Ole Miss offense of 2019 with A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, former college teammates? Metcalf, Brown, DeVonta Smith. Like, could you imagine that? What if Garrett Wilson became available at some point? And you add Garrett Wilson, who I really liked for the Eagles in 2022 before they traded for A.J. Brown. And I think the Eagles liked him too, but he went early on in that first round. I don't think he was plan A and A.J. Brown was plan B, but I think Garrett Wilson was someone on their radar if he was available within the range of their first round pick if they did not trade for A.J. Brown. What if somebody like that becomes available? If Howie Roseman monitors the star wide receiver market and says, here's a way to replace Dallas Goedert's targets, and we just run with 11 personnel heavy. And I think that makes sense anyway, because although I like the 12 personnel package at times, I think that condensed look can help with the power run game, especially in the passing game too. It can help with certain things, the play action game. But I think the Eagles operate better. Jalen Hurts operates better when this offense is spread out. Maybe they just go wide receiver heavy. And they have Dotson under contract still for the next few seasons. They have at least his contract control with the fifth-year option if they decide to take that, as he was a former first-round pick. But let's say they want to make a massive upgrade, and Dallas Goedert is not part of this team's future. Yes, you could replace him in the form of another tight end, which we'll get into. But what if Howie said, I'm going all in on receiver. I'm adding that third head to the three-headed dragon of A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, and whoever else you bring in. Again, I'm not saying this is something I'm predicting. I'm just, again, speculating about what's going on in that crazy psycho brain of Howie Roseman. So don't shoot the messenger. That's just pure speculation, but it's an idea. Again, this is an ideas episode. Just throwing stuff at the wall, and there's going to be some crazy ideas, but I think Howie Roseman probably has a lot of crazy ideas, and it helps him eventually find some really good ones that have helped you compete for championships and win championships. A more calm version of what I'm talking about, I think you could see another heavy investment in tight end, even if Dallas Goedert is kept for 2025, potentially for the long term. Let's say they do extend Dallas Goedert. Another way to kind of be different would be to go back to what you did in 2018, investing two big resources in the tight end position by having Zack Baun under that big contract and then drafting Dallas Goedert, trading up for him in the second round. Could Howie Roseman be aggressive and add another tight end and say, I'm actually going to go back into this well of creating a really pass-heavy, pass-friendly 12 personnel package? Maybe that's I don't think Tyler Warren of Penn State is going to be available. I don't think there's any chance Warren from Penn State is going to be in range for the Eagles to trade up. But maybe they like somebody else, like a Mason Taylor. Maybe they like one of those top-tier draft prospects. Maybe someone like Kyle Pitts becomes available from the Atlanta Falcons. Adding another tight end, I think just in general, adding another big-name pass catcher, zoomed out, you'd say that really doesn't make much sense. Like, that's the last thing they need. Jahan Dotson couldn't get involved in the offense last year because your big four are just going to eat up 99.9% of the touches. And you're just going to be running clearing routes for days. But there's a scenario where, and a lot of it's dependent on Dallas Goedert's future. If Dallas Goedert wasn't back, though, that's a lot of targets that go out the window. Maybe you bring in a big-name tight end, a big-name wide receiver. Maybe you do it anyway. I think that's, again, something that you should have on your radar when it comes to looking at what Howie Roseman is going to do next. And then there are some other radical ideas, like how about adding a second really good running back? I'm not saying trade up for Ashton Genty, but let's say you take Henderson, or you take the top tier, one of the other Ohio State backs in the draft, or the kid from UNC. Let's say you start running 2 running back sets with Saquon Barkley and another stud. With Jalen Hurts, you start running some triple option like the 2015 Carolina Panthers used to. What if you added an insanely talented fullback? They finally started using fullbacks last year for the first time in a long time, since Leonard Weaver or Owen Schmidt? Maybe you start using 2 quarterback sets. I don't know. But what I love about this football team, what I love about this general manager, is they're always trying to think of new creative ways to win football games. And that's just even if things don't always work, eventually when you think like this, you're going to hit on gold. Last year they struck gold by getting Saquon Barkley. I think this is the right mentality to have. Again, don't be different just for the sake of being different. There are some things that everyone in the NFL does, including you, that's basic, but it's because it works, and you should keep doing that. Again, investing in the offensive and defensive line, investing in the quarterback position. There's reasons certain positions are premier positions. There's reasons you do things in the draft a certain way or in free agency, and everyone does it that way because it's what works. With the salary cap, with everything, it's because it's what works. Don't be different just to be different. But coming up with new ideas to stand out, to get ahead of the curve, to create an advantage in such a close NFL. The NFL is so close. Parity in the NFL, like teams 1 to 32, it's not as significant of a gap as it is in the NBA or the MLB, right? Or the NHL. Like the NFL, it's any given Sunday. There's a reason that is a saying. And so thinking like this is good business because it helps you find a competitive advantage, that edge. That's really good, and it's helped the Eagles in the past. And I think it's going to continue to help them moving forward. And I don't know what that's going to be this year. Even like in the past, it might not even be like what kind of player you add. But in 2016, like trading draft picks, that was not a thing. For Howie to be as aggressive as he was as a trader, he really started the trade era of the NFL in 2016, in my opinion. 2016, 2017, Howie started this new aggressive trade-friendly era of the NFL. That was a different idea of how to build a winner, is by being aggressive and sending draft picks away. And then when everyone was going that way and was catching up, after 2020, Howie Roseman started collecting draft picks because he saw, okay, everyone's willing to be aggressive. The Rams were in their F them picks era. Now I'm going to take advantage by collecting a lot of picks. And now I have the advantage of saying I can use these picks to be aggressive myself, or I can just bag them for the future and have all these rookie good players on cost-controlled contracts. Like I can have my cake and eat it too. You can have the best of both worlds. When you have all those draft picks, you have so much flexibility. I don't know what he's going to try to do with the salary cap kicking the can down the road. The Eagles have basically created the first luxury tax in the NFL by just selling liquid so they can continue to backload contracts. I don't know what they're going to try to do, but I think it's fascinating to figure out every single offseason. It's one of my favorite things to do is be like, try to get into the head of Howie and say, what's that creative side of his brain doing this time around? So thought it would be a fun podcast episode topic. And I think my favorite one, though, is let's go all in on a star receiver. Can you imagine the Eagles trade for a DK Metcalf to go along with A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith? I'd rather just pay Dallas Goedert. But because I do like John Dotson a lot as wide receiver 3, but that's an idea. If they trade Goddard away, maybe instead of just adding a really good tight end to replace him, you bring back a Zack Ertz and then you say, let's go all in on a 3rd star receiver. I don't know. I could see it. All right, guys, we'll wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles coming up next. I'm going to tell you why in free agency, there's a certain type of free agent the Eagles are going to target, and I'll tell you why coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, so I do think when free agency starts next week, you're not going to see as aggressive of a Howie Roseman as we've seen in years past. I think a lot of his decisions have had to be in-house, extending Zack Baun. He's extended Saquon Barkley. He released Darius Slay. Going to have decisions to make on Mekhi Becton and Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. Like those three guys, I'm sure he's going to be heavily monitoring how their market forms because I think he'd love to bring those players back at the right price, especially Becton. I think he has the best chance of coming back next week. Like that's a priority. Bringing back Isaiah Rodgers and Oren Burks probably on short-term extensions. I think you'll see that as well. But I don't think you should expect to see Howie go out there and just make the splash moves that you're used to in past off seasons. I think there is, though, like I still think at the same time he will be active. I think he's going to be active, though, targeting a certain type of free agent because with the Eagles and all the prime contract, high-end paid players they have on this roster, especially on offense, they have to recoup draft picks. They need to make sure they have a lot of picks for the future because the way to keep this window open when you pay all these players top-tier money, you got to have cost-efficient starters that you found in the draft to replace the Bectons of the world, the Sweats, the Milton Williams. Like you have to have those. You got to keep hitting on your draft picks, and the best way to hit on your draft picks is to have a lot of swings at the bat, right? A lot of chances at the plate, like Howie has said in the past. So they're going to want to collect draft picks. Compensatory picks are going to be very important. I think they're going to get one for Kellen Moore, for if Josh Sweat leaves, Milton Williams. If they lose Mekhi Becton, if they lose a lot of these free agents, they're going to get a lot of draft picks back for the next few drafts. I do think they'll have that in mind when they're in free agency, and they're going to target guys that will not affect the compensatory pick formula. So, for example, there's 3 guys that have gotten released this week on the defensive line that I think could interest the Eagles. The Seattle Seahawks this week released Draymond Jones, who they just recently paid a really big contract to. He's young. He played for Vic Fangio in Denver. He's a consistent 4 to 5 sack a year guy. Is he the elite player of a Milton Williams? No. But I think this is a good, solid guy that can be part of the rotation with Jordan Davis, Moro Ijoma, next to Jalen Carter. And because he was released, he's not going to count against your comp pick formula. Draymond Jones makes so much sense. If I had to make a prediction of what guy from another organization or what UFA that's out there the Eagles have the most likely chance of signing, I'd probably say it's Draymond Jones. Again, he's not Milton Williams, but a solid 4 to 5 sack guy as part of that rotation with Davis and Ijoma, I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, another defensive tackle that was just released today, an older player. This kind of gives me that Malik Jackson vibe. I hope that's not the case. I hope this would go better, but the Washington Commanders just released Jonathan Allen. He is 30 years old, but very consistent pass rusher on the interior, 5 to 7 sacks a year you can bank on. Was injured last year, though. I will say when he came back, he did look good. He had 3 sacks down the stretch. This one, again, I don't love bringing in a lot of veterans, but as long as you're not going to ask him to be a main full-time starter and he's just part of a rotation, kind of like Linval Joseph was and Ndamukong Suh, then that's fine. Then I'm on board with bringing in an older veteran. Jonathan Allen would make some sense. And like I said, he would not cost you a pick with the compensatory pick formula because Washington just released him. And then another guy that was just released today, Harold Landry of the Tennessee Titans, he was just put out into the UFA pool. I mean, Harold Landry's sack production makes him seem like an obvious choice for the Eagles. 9 sacks in 2024, 10.5 in 2023, 12 in 2021, 5.5 the year before that, 9 before that, 4.5 in 2018. Over 6 years, he has 50.5 sacks and 2 interceptions. Like, Harold Landry's been a very good player since Tennessee drafted him. He's only 28 years old. Like, he's still in his prime. That's another idea. UFA doesn't cost you a comp pick. Could be part of that rotation and a veteran to go with Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith, and either Bryce Huff or somebody that you draft. My only thing with Harold Landry, I wouldn't hate it, but there are so many edge rushers out there right now. Like Joey Bosa just got released by the Chargers. You've got Khalil Mack and Chase Young and Hassan Reddick, Malcolm Kuntz. There are so many choices that I like that I don't know if Landry would be my favorite idea. His pass rush win rate the last few years has not been great. I talked to my guy Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans about him. I'm not in love with that idea, but I could see the Eagles like take a chance on one of those guys. Like that's the kind of free agent that they're going to target. A Harold Landry type, a Jonathan Allen, a Draymond Jones, because having those comp picks for the future is very important for the current, where the Eagles are right now in their contending lifespan. It's important to collect draft picks, to have a lot of them, because you need those cost-effective starters moving forward as you continue to pay guys like, eventually Cam Jurgens, and, soon there's going to be an extension for Jalen Carter, and maybe Nakobe Dean in the future, and soon, before you know it, a raise for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, or, a Quinyon Mitchell, a Jordan Davis. Like, there's a lot of decisions they have to make. Nolan Smith. Those guys eventually are going to get paid sooner rather than later, especially with how proactive Howie likes to be. So these are the type of players that you want to get. Cost-effective free agents that don't cost you draft picks because you need those draft picks. So those are three guys I could definitely see the Eagles targeting next week. Draymond Jones, Jonathan Allen, and Harold Landry. And it makes sense for the positions that the Eagles need this year: defensive end and defensive tackle. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen are my guys, Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez of the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, getting you ready for the NFL Draft Monday through Friday. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.